Hey guys, and welcome to the February 2016 edition of Commander on a Budget. As I usually do when a new set comes out, I try to make that much Commander on a Budget. A Commander from that set, what did I do recently? I did Chandra for Magic Origins, and I did Zada for Battle for Zendikar, and now we're on Mina and Den Wildborn. That's another red one. I don't really pick the red ones on purpose. Those just tend to be the ones that interest me the most so far. So hopefully Shadows over Innistrad doesn't have another red one. Maybe I'll try to avoid it. But this one is Mina and Den Wildborn. Before I get into talking about the deck, I wanted to say my videos are also posted on paperchampion.net. If you're watching my videos there, then great. If you're not, you should check it out for other great Magic the Gathering content. All right, so Mina and Den Wildborn is a sweet new creature from Oath of the Gatewatch, as a 4-mana 4/4 who has the ability to let me play a land each turn, and then on top of that, lets you return a land to give a creature trample. So what that made me want to build is sort of a Landfall commander deck, because with Mina and Den Wildborn, it's super easy to get at least 2 Landfall triggers a turn. You don't even have to draw lands because of their ability. I guess there's 2 of them. And that is pretty sweet. So this deck is in fact a Landfall deck. That's a lot of fun to play. It can easily get 3 or 4 landfall triggers a turn, which can quickly kill your opponent, depending on what you're doing. As usual, I have things divided into piles. I wanted to talk about a few lands first, because some of the lands are actually kind of special selections for Mina and Den Wildborn. I'm running Colony Garden because getting the plants isn't irrelevant, and if I return my garden, I can get more and more plants. So lands with Enter the Battlefield abilities are pretty good with Mina and Den as well. Law and Order Reborn, same sort of thing. It lets me graft, and then I can bounce it if I want to. What else? Also, Spine Rock Null. I can, play the exiled card from under it, bounce it again, and then get another exiled card. And Temple of Abandon, I guess, scrying once. I also have a gain land, which I think is... I have 2 gain lands, actually. No, just 1. I could run 2, I guess, but... It's not what I have. And the gain lands are okay with her, too. Like, if you're in desperate need of life, with them, I should say. If you're in desperate need of life, then it doesn't hurt. All right, so we'll talk about sort of the staples I have first. I did sort of trim a lot of stuff out of this deck because it was really hard to make a good deck and make sure I played like a million staples. So I actually ended up cutting a lot of sort of staples. I don't have like Lightning Bolt or a lot of really great removal. I just sort of try to overwhelm my opponent quickly by doing lots of damage or gaining a bunch of life or something, but we'll talk more about that later. Mana Vault, of course, is in here, as it should be. Soul Ring as well. Gruul Signet, Felwar Stone. Then we have Hull Breach, which is a great card. It's a great budget card if you're trying to play some red-green commander, because it's an easy 2-for-1 a lot of times in commander for 2 mana. Chaos Warp, another good budget card for commander. It's cheap. And it deals with creatures with anything pretty effectively. Bow of Nylea is a nice little utility card to have. It can gain me life, can kill flyers, can give me +1/+1 counters, or even shuffle things or put things on the bottom of my library, which I guess I'm not going to do very often. Garruk Wildspeaker helps you ramp, makes dudes, helps you overrun. Not really much bad to say there. Acidic Slime, very flexible. Another like always 2-for-1 or close to always. And Genesis Hydra. This deck gets a lot of lands in play, and I figured having 1 big X creature seemed good, and Genesis Hydra is a good one of those. All right, so these 2 piles are on the right. We have cards. Actually, I need to move this over, I just noticed. On the right, we have cards that help me get multiple land drops, and on the left, we have things with landfall or pseudo-landfall. Older creatures or creatures who aren't from a Zendikar block don't say landfall. So we'll talk about the creatures first. We have a Cumin Stonewaker. In late game, when I can get a bunch of lands out there in 1 turn, 3 or 4, being able to crank out 12 elemental damage is pretty good. Plated Geopede's nice. Again, it becomes a massive attacker basically every turn. And on top of that, I can also give it Trample, of course, because of Mina and Den. Valakut Predator just gets huge, and I can also give it Trample. Tunneling Geopede does damage every time I play a land, so that can basically be a win condition. Grazing Gladeheart I can use to buy me time by gaining a bunch of life. Snapping Gnarlid also gets big, and on top of that, with Mina and Den in play anyway, can get Trample. Kudzu gets permanently big with +1/+1 counters. Retreat to Kazandu can either gain me life or make my creatures big, depending on the situation. I like that flexibility. Retreat to Valakut can either make it so a bunch of creatures can't block or pump one evasive creature or something like that by +2/+0. Undergrowth Champion, it's kind of like a Kudzu on steroids. It gets bigger, and on top of that, as long as there's a +1/+1 counter on it, damage can't kill it. Seer's Sundial is a pretty great card because it turns every land drop into a draw a card effect if I pay 2. Embodiment of Fury is great late game because you can make a bunch of lands into dudes and win that way. Kosi's Ravagers like Play to Geopede, or not Play to Geopede, Tunneling Geopede. Getting both in play is a dream, not one I've achieved yet, but maybe I will while I'm recording. Zendikar's Royal is a card, an engine that just makes creatures. Spore Mound is the same sort of thing, but the creatures it makes are smaller, but it comes with a body. Baru, Fist of Krosa, only works with forests, which is relevant, but when you play a forest, he pumps the whole team, and this deck can search for forests pretty easily. Pumps the whole team and gives them trample, by the way. Territorial Baloth just gets bigger. Embodiment of Insight makes dudes, kind of like the other embodiment. Cumin Hellkite can start doing damage, so I guess the real dream is getting the Hellkite, the Geopede, and the Kosi's Ravager in play all together. Then things get pretty gross. But the Hellkite, unlike those other two, can actually kill creatures too if it needs to. Baloth Woodcrasher gets incredibly massive and gains trample already. Orenrife Hydra gets bigger and bigger permanently. Rampaging Baloths makes dudes and has a good body himself. Omnath makes dudes and makes every dude who dies, that's an elemental shock, or lightning bolt actually. And Grove Rumbler just gets big. So those are all the various win conditions. I mean, this deck can do pretty well even if you just get one of those and Mina and Den in play, and you can just start playing a bunch of lands a turn, and they're just not going to be able to block your like 8/8 Valakut Predator who has trample, and that's going to be the case a lot of the time. So now we'll talk about sort of the cards that help us do multiple land drops a turn or have special synergy in this deck other than the creatures. We got Cultivate, pretty classic. It's basically a staple. I could have put it in the staple pile, but it's extra good in a deck like this because you can Cultivate and then play both lands with Mina and Den in play. Far Wanderings is a little weaker, but if I ever hit Threshold, which can happen with the number of ramp spells I have, then I get three landfall triggers off of one card, which is pretty gross. Fertilid, 3 mana 2/2, who can remove a counter to put lands in play, so if I play it on turn 4 or later, I can get 2 right away. Harrow, it's a promo version, so you don't see it, but it's 3 mana for an instant. Sacrifice a land, search your library for 2 lands, so it's 2 land triggers. Kodama's Reach is the exact same card as Cultivate, except that it's arcane, but that's irrelevant in this deck. Nissa's Pilgrimage is kind of a weaker version. It only gets me forests, but if I have Spell Mastery, then I get 3 of them. A Wave of Vitriol is kind of a great thing to have because, first of all, it lets me deal with all of my opponent's artifacts, enchantments, and non-basic lands, which includes mine, but I don't have a huge number of artifacts or enchantments. And then for each land sacrificed this way, its controller searches his library for a basic land. So if I have like 3 or 4 basic lands in play, not only am I probably getting a great deal blowing up my opponent's stuff, I'm also going to get 4 landfall triggers. New Frontiers is one that can basically just instantly win the game. Each player gets to search their library for a basic land card equal X number of them, and we each put them into the battlefield tapped. But I'm going to be doing this on my turn, and chances are if I'm casting New Frontiers, you're dead. So that's pretty great, especially because their lands come into play tapped. For me, that's like cool. I get 1 million landfall triggers, and for my opponent, they may think it's cool, but then they might be dead. Primal Growth is another 3 mana, put a basic land card into play, but it does have a kicker that I would be happy to use, especially with like a Cumin Stonewaker or something like that, that lets me get 2 landfall triggers. Animus Awakening is another card that can just instantly win the game, lets me look at the top X cards and put every land of any kind, basic, non-basic, into play. Boundless Realms, another card that just instantly wins the game. Even if I'm just casting it for 7, that means that I get, 7 lands, 7 landfall triggers. Panglacial Worm doesn't have landfall and he doesn't help me get lands, but as often as this deck searches my library, I may occasionally want to slam a Panglacial Worm out of it, so that's why he's in here. Oblivion Sower, the most expensive card in the deck, unfortunately. It's gone up a lot since Eldrazi had gotten better in both Modern and Standard, but I think it's still worth running. It's just too good not to. He's going to get a couple landfall triggers most of the time and be a 5/8, so that's pretty good. Primeval Bounty is basically a green staple as well, but in this case, I mean, it's extra good in this deck because I can gain a bunch of life with it. But I can also, do the other two things as well, which is pretty great. Yavimaya Elder, another card that's more or less a staple, but at its best in this deck because it searches me a bunch of lands. It doesn't put them into play, but if I have Mina and Den in play, it basically does. Plus, it's ridiculous because it can draw you a card. It's a crazy old card that's like an easy 3-for-1. I don't know what they were thinking. Burnished Heart, search gets me 2 landfall triggers in addition to being a decent body. Verdant Confluence is from Legendary, that's Legendary Cube, right? Or something. Yeah, I think it's Legendary Cube. Those confluences are. I can use it to get 3 landfall triggers. I can use it to return important permanents from my graveyard or put +1/+1 counters on things, so very, very flexible. This is Renewal, gives me 3 landfall triggers, ramps me, gives me 7 life. Storm Cauldron's one of the weirder cards in this deck. I've played the deck like 4 times. Haven't gotten a chance to play Storm Cauldron yet. But it seems like it'd be pretty sweet in this deck. 5-mana artifact that lets me, do whatever I want, basically. Not really, but it makes me and my opponent and I can both play extra lands, and on top of that, anytime a land is tapped for mana, it returns to its owner's hand, which for me, like if I'm ahead and I play Storm Cauldron, I don't know if I can lose unless my opponent has artifact destruction, or even if the board is at stasis, I can play Storm Cauldron and get as many landfall triggers a turn, at least 2 every turn, 3 every turn actually with Storm Cauldron and Mina and Den in play, and my opponent can't really cast his big spells because all his lands will go back to his hand. Explosive Vegetation gives me 2 landfall triggers. Hunting Wilds gives me 2 landfall triggers and has the bonus of, if I kick it, giving me making the forests I got anyway into 3/3s. Just showed you that. Sword of the Animist, decent piece of equipment that gets me a basic land card every time equipped creature swings. Into the Wilds is a cool card. Lets me look at the top card of my library every turn. If it's a land, I put it in the battlefield, so it's a free landfall trigger and card advantage. Peregrination only searches for 1 land, but it lets me scry, and if Mina and Den are in play, I can play 2. Tribe Elder, another staple, but at its best in this deck. Colony Heart Expedition, kind of like a perfect card for this deck between both having landfall and getting me 2 landfall triggers. Solemn Simulacrum, another staple, but again at its best in this deck. Colony Gem is not a mana rock I usually play, but in this deck where it ensures I'll get landfall triggers, and like the turn I play it, I can then just play the 2 lands I return to my hand like right away. And then Xenagos, probably one of the strongest cards in the deck, because this deck can really make a bunch of creatures. Sometimes they're just tokens, but it doesn't matter for Xenagos. And then if you ever -6, he's another way to just sort of win the game instantly. If you hit like 4 lands with that, you get 4 landfall triggers. So that is the deck. It's a pretty sweet one, I think. It's fun, a fun new commander, and now I will play 3 games with it. So thanks for watching, and don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.